And you're on, Ernest.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for having me. My name is Ernest Nina Murcia. I am a Spanish-English interpreter based in the United States, and my topic for today's speech is the role of the interpreting technician on Zoom. So our story begins with myself as an interpreter. I primarily work in courts, but my work the last year or so has pivoted to working in a remote mode. And so this is a picture of a mediation session in a civil case that I was able to do using Zoom's simultaneous function. I was not only interpreting it, but I did all of the back-end setup with the client. And so at a time where I wasn't able to work in person, Zoom gave me the opportunity to continue to serve my clients in a remote context. And so this grew into other conference type work, including this, which is an event with NPR, National Public Radio here in the US, which was a speech or an interview by the host of a show called Radio Ambulante with the host of another radio show / podcast called Radio Lab. And again, I was in a interpreter consultant role in that I interpreted the event, but also worked with the client on the back end to set it up because they had never done Zoom interpreting before. And so I made the road by walking, as it were, by interpreting and offering this to my clients, and in the process of doing so, learning about Zoom and learning the hard way about what can go wrong on Zoom simultaneous interpretation. And from a very early stage, I was able to share this knowledge with some of my colleagues. This is an image of a session. This is completely informal. This is a session that my business partner, Amber Hilton, and I did for Judy Jenner and another interpreter based here in the US named Annabella Tidona, where just as friends, we walked them through and played around with some of the features of Zoom's simultaneous function. And then additionally was able to do some teaching with two of my colleagues, including this webinar that we offered for the University of Arizona's National Center for Interpretation. And so that's been my journey that has led me to being able to work as a technician on Zoom and then share that knowledge and those hard-won lessons with you all today. And so let's take a look. This is the image that is familiar to many of you, and for many of you in Europe, maybe you are already back working in booths. This to me at the moment is a distant memory, but it's a good jumping off point for the discussion today, because when you look at the setup, there's a booth, there's a console, there's a microphone. There was a technician that set all of that up. And so the role of the technician, grosso modo, is the same: setting up the interpreter for success, allowing them to have the equipment and keep it functioning while they're interpreting when you're working on Zoom. But obviously the actual nuts and bolts of the work, the setup, there is not a physical booth, there's not a physical console. And so the actual means by which you achieve that work are going to look different online. And that is what we'll be discussing today. And so I'd like to start by putting Zoom in its context, let's say on the spectrum of different platforms that people use. And so we'll start with the left end of this spectrum, which is what I refer to as conventional platforms, which are simple video platforms that you could use. I like to say these are the platforms that you could use to call your grandmother on her birthday, or if you want to do a group video call with your friends from when you grew up or something. There is no simultaneous interpreting functionality unless you are doing some high-level adaptations and muting and having a phone line running in parallel to it. Basically, these are conventional platforms that are just existing for people to chat on video. But they are used in conference settings. They are used in court settings here in the States, oftentimes just for consecutive interpretation. The middle point of the spectrum is Zoom, which has those elements of being a conventional video platform. So you can use it just to have a friendly chat with your friends or neighbors, but it does have at least a primitive simultaneous interpretation function, which sets it apart from what are referred to as the conventional platforms. And so now we get to the right end of the spectrum, which are proper RSI platforms like Interactio and Kudo, and there are many other examples, there seem to be more every day, that are platforms purpose-built for simultaneous interpretation of events, oftentimes designed by interpreters that have all of the bells and whistles that you need to interpret effectively in a conference setting. And so remote simultaneous interpretation is not anything new. Kudo existed before the pandemic. Interprify existed before the pandemic. The change has been the amount of people who are now using these platforms. And Zoom is a relatively new player in this field. I believe the simultaneous interpretation function for Zoom was debuted third or fourth quarter of 2019. And so auspicious timing for Zoom that would come on the scene right before a lot of people were no longer able to work in person. And so because it's new and because it's slightly less sophisticated in its features for interpretation, Zoom presents unique challenges, and thus the work of the interpreter and the work of the technician is different on Zoom compared to these other platforms. And so you see that clearly spelled out here. And you don't have to look any further than the interfaces on the respective platforms to understand the differences between the platforms and then the differences in the technician's work and the interpreter's work. This is the Kudo interpreter interface or dashboard that many of you that have worked on here are intimately familiar with. And this is, if you could even call it a dashboard, the extent of Zoom's interpreter interface. And so let's look at the similarities. They both have a function for controlling output channel for the interpreter. Now let's look at some things that Kudo has that Zoom does not. Kudo has, at the touch of a button, the ability to control your input channel. And so if there is relay happening and you want to be hearing English from the French booth and you do another language, click on English and you'll be getting the English feed, no problem, or hopefully no problem. And likewise, when it's time to take a turn with your partner, you touch the start handover button, and there's a series of steps there whereby the system coordinates with your partner so that you're able to hand off the microphone. And more importantly, there's only ever one of you on the microphone at the same time. And so for these two functions, microphone handover and taking relay, Zoom offers duct tape. And so not literal duct tape, but Zoom, in the absence of a structured function for these purposes, offers you as the interpreter or the technician or the client the opportunity to create your own system for doing a seamless handover or for taking relay. And so that puts more of the onus on the interpreter and likewise on the client or the technician to ensure that things run smoothly. Because Kudo's handover function, structured as it is, it serves as a guardrail to prevent both interpreters from speaking into the channel at the same time, and ideally also would prevent both interpreters from being silent on the microphone at the same time because somebody is getting a blinking notification saying your partner has handed you the mic, start talking, roughly, somewhat abbreviated maybe. That does not exist in Zoom. In Zoom, the interpreter has the absolute ability to be talking into the same channel with their partner at the same time, or to have both microphones muted. And there is no God, as it were. There is nobody from the platform. There's no notification that pops up from Zoom saying both mics in this channel are off. There's nothing. It is completely blank slate. And so that's a challenge for interpreters, and that's a challenge for those of us who work supporting interpreters to ensure that meetings work well. And so, and I want to take a moment to make this point, which is my purpose in sharing these differences is not to say that Kudo is a better platform, because this is not an absolute comparison. In some cases, the client may come to the interpreter and say, we are doing this event on Zoom. Do you want to interpret, or can you offer tech support? And so in that situation, it's moot to point out the differences or the virtues of Kudo relative to Zoom. And likewise, cost is an issue. If you have to pitch a client on something and they're not willing to invest $200 an hour US in using Kudo, then Zoom would be a viable option if you can make it work without running into some of the issues that we'll be discussing. And so let's talk about the planning that goes into this, because the job of this technician on Zoom does not begin at the moment that everybody logs on to the meeting. The great Chinese scholar Sun Tzu said, "Every battle is won before it is fought." And so for an interpreter technician on Zoom, it is absolutely vital to be having a conversation with the client well ahead of time to figure out logistical details, such as who is going to manage designating an interpreter? How are we going to communicate during the meeting? How are participants going to be instructed on selecting a channel? Working backwards from the most common issues that come up and thinking about how can we plan to avoid these issues so that we have fewer fires to put out. That's some imagery that we're going to come back to here in a few slides. And so this is an example of a slide that I would give a client if they were willing to use it, that could be put up at the beginning of a session. This would be for Spanish and English, that can be shown, giving people a visual reference on how to select a channel so that they are able to properly listen to interpretation. The next issue would be training of interpreters, because not all interpreters come experienced and competent on using Zoom. And so that's going to look different for every meeting, but in some cases, there is going to be training required. And so this would be an example of some of the materials that I share. This was not initially in the materials I would train interpreters on, but it has been an issue. And so with somebody who is really not experienced, this has to be stressed, because if for whatever reason they are disconnected and they lose their, I call it the toggle, they lose sight of their interpreting dashboard for Zoom, they're on the floor and they're about to cause a big old disturbance in that meeting if they do not mute immediately. And so this would be an example of, again, proactive planning to avoid the most common, and in this case, the most disastrous issues that can come up in a meeting. This would be another example of a way to educate interpreters to understand the tool that they are working with and all of the information that they can find themselves that will help them be successful in a meeting. It's also important to define the scope of a technician's duties, because in a lot of cases, poor audio from the speakers can affect interpreters. And there are things that a technician can do given certain parameters. If they are co-host or if they are hosts, they can mute people. They can take people off of video if they're having a connectivity issue that's affecting their sound. But if it's not your meeting, you need to be very clear on what it is that you are and are not allowed to do. And so let's walk through briefly the procedures to follow in a meeting as a technician. The first thing that you need to do is to make sure that all interpreters and parties are able to connect to the Zoom meeting, oftentimes with two different devices. You need to be able to establish chat channels. I don't have anybody ever work in the Zoom chat for a multitude of reasons. And so my setup and what I encourage interpreters to do is to have their Zoom screen and then to have WhatsApp web open in parallel on their dashboard, overlapped, so that they can see both windows at all times. And then even within that, I have different chats going with different booths or with my other techs or with the meeting organizers. You want to do a sound check on both devices to make sure that they are able to hear both the floor and other interpreters if there's relay or if they're monitoring their partner. And then once the meeting begins, you're going to be listening to different channels. I don't do more than 3 to make sure that there is always sound coming out and that everybody sounds okay, especially at the time that there's a handover happening, because again, that is happening entirely at the interpreter's initiative without any guidance from the system. And you are just generally the communication hub between the host and the interpreters, so that the interpreters, if they have an issue, it all runs through you. And likewise, the organizers don't have to write 10 different interpreters to say the meeting is going to run late. We need you to stay on a little bit later. And I will end there because I see that I am at time. This is a rich topic that could be talked about for hours, and I would gladly do it if you allowed me. But I will now close the speech, and I will jump briefly to my closing slide, which is a link to my social media, a link to a website where we have a blog discussing some of these issues. And I thank you for your attention.